So where we left off last time, Florida is now part of the United States. President Monroe takes control of Florida, and Florida did not have enough people to become a state right off the bat. Plus, statehood in this period is often conflicted. You're trying to balance slave states and free states in the Congress in terms of congressional representation and the U.S. Senate. So Andrew Jackson is the first territorial governor of Florida. And on July 10th, the province of East Florida, so West Florida is still being governed separately, East Florida is transferred to Andrew Jackson with strict orders from the president, from President Monroe, no more incidents. Okay, none of the problems we've had before. We got away with it. We've gotten Florida, but let's not have any more problems. And Jackson didn't really like Florida. He was pretty inhospitable. He resigns in December. By the next year, Florida and East Florida and West Florida are joined. Now, the big events that take place during the territorial period in Florida is the Second Seminole War, the big event. And it is the first war in American history, or actually, no, it's not the first war in American history, sorry, the War of 1812, the United States did not win either. That was a draw, so to speak. But it is the first war against a Native American nation that was a draw, really, that the Americans did not win. And the Seminole War, the Second Seminole War, was born out of the same sort of Jeffersonian considerations we see and during the lead up to Florida being conquered by the United States and then Florida's statehood period. Now, by 1840, there were 20 counties in the Florida Territory. It still didn't have enough of a population for statehood, and this population that I'm going to mention includes slaves, right? It was more than half slave. Leon and Gadsden County were the two most populated counties. Tallahassee is settled in 1822 and becomes the territorial capital, and immediately you have plantations spring up in the Jeffersonian style. And Tallahassee becomes a proper Jeffersonian city, agrarian, or town, I should say, agrarian, huge plantations, lots of slaves, large landowners, neighboring Gadsden and Jefferson counties as well. And they were the other two counties in the state that had a substantial population, or relatively speaking, a substantial population. Jackson also, Jackson County. So think about it. Middle Florida, which is what we called that region then, was the most populated region in the state. Suddenly, Escambia County, which is Pensacola, and St. Johns County, which is St. Augustine, San Agustin in Spanish colonial days, the two leading cities in Florida, the two prominent cities. Pensacola has featured very prominently in our narrative to this point in terms of the Battle of Pensacola in 1814. It was an important battle in the American Revolution in 1781. And I've written a couple of books that focus around the importance of St. Augustine in the 1600s, the 1700s, and the early 1800s. Well, by 1840, St. John's and Escambia are insignificant places in terms of the Florida economy compared, or the Jeffersonian economy compared to Middle Florida, where you have arable land, large plots of land for slaveholding and for plantations. You can grow crops, and you can have your yeoman farmers too in the very Jeffersonian way. So, in fact, there was no growth in Escambia and St. Johns County between 1825 and 1840, right? And I guess if you went to Florida at that period, St. Augustine and Pensacola were probably the only two proper cities, right? When I say Tallahassee had sprung up with these huge estates and these huge plantations. And the population I'm talking about was mostly enslaved. So I don't have a table of the free population. Probably the free population of St. Augustine was probably as high and in Pensacola. They're probably as high as they were in Tallahassee. But that is what's happened to Florida. In Middle Florida, that has become a Jeffersonian agrarian area. Now, when you go to the interior of Florida, interior of the peninsula, and we've talked about this extensively on the Florida History Podcast, and it's something maybe we'll do a video series on at some point. The Second Seminole War, the attempts to run the Seminoles out of Florida, the attempts to move them to Oklahoma, the attempts to take all their land was part of the Jeffersonian notion of manifest destiny and creating more territory for slaveholders. This was the key, and was largely about expanding slavery and getting Florida to a point where it could become a state in the Union and be an additional slave state. So we also know that the Seminoles, while many of them are killed and many of them are shipped off to Oklahoma, they hold out and they win a major battle, the Battle of, we call it the Battles of the Loxahatchee now. In school, you might have learned of it as the Battles of Jupiter Inlet. But in what is now Palm Beach County, and because of that victory, the Seminoles, and they faced some incredible figures in history that would go on to be important in the future of American history, including future President Zachary Taylor. They faced him at the Battle of Lake Okeechobee. They faced Winfield Scott in that war. Joseph E. Johnston was at the battle in Jupiter, the Battles of the Loxahatchee. But because of that, the Seminoles are not conquered. They retreat into southern Florida. And Florida is still kind of this wild, wild west and this unruly territory. But the Jeffersonians are in control of the state. And while there are some Whigs, anti-Jacksonian Whigs, Richard Keith Call would be maybe the most prominent of them, if you've heard of Call Street in Tallahassee. It was by and large not there weren't that many Whigs in Florida. Now, that's going to change. And we're probably going to get into that in the next episode when we also talk about statehood.